Good morning again, algebra students. I am really missing you guys, and I'm sure you're missing me, and I'm sure you're missing solving all the algebra problems. But since we can't be together, this is the next best option, and we are going to continue with Chapter 9. It really is our goal probably to get through all of 9 and all of 10 as well as we possibly can. Now, one of the things that I told you back before we stopped having school together was that once we got to chapters 8, 9, and 10, that it would get a little harder. And so it certainly is going to get harder, and my expectation of you is that you will reach out for help if you are confused. Now, chapter 9, it's going to be a little while before we actually get to the test for this. It'll be after spring break sometime. And I think I've mentioned that I want to try to do possibly a Zoom study session where we can, I can have my whiteboard set up and we'll get the Zoom camera, something like this. And you'll be able to ask questions and we'll try to solve them. So one of the things that I want to make sure that I'm communicating is that we now have a different goal in life. And our goals in life have changed from solving for x. Then we moved to getting a line on the graph. Then we moved to getting 2 lines on the graph. Then we moved to inequalities. Then we moved to exponential functions, and that's where we had like 2 to the x power. And so we're seeing exponential functioning going on in our current day with all of the coronavirus. Now our goal in life is becoming very different. And last week we learned how to take a quadratic equation, and that is something like this. Where we have an A value, a B value, and a C value. So we have all of those values that we find out early on, and we then learned how we could find the vertex, and then we learned how we could get this thing on the graph. So let's review with that. And so what I'm going to do is just remind you that A equals 2, B equals 4, and C equals 6. Now, if you will just go back a little further to 9.4, you will see on page 521, x equals negative b over 2x. Excuse me, 2a. And that helps us to find the vertex. And that's important because remember, on either side of the vertex are mirror images. And so what we're going to do, in order to get this, we use these. So x is going to be negative 4, because here's that negative, over 2 times 2, which is 4. Our vertex is going to be negative 1. So if we were, and I'm going to make this like that, if we were putting that on a graph, our vertex would be running somewhere, negative 1. I'm sure one of you caught that. I hope one of you caught that. But it's going to be over here on this side. Now, what I need to do, I'm going to erase everything except that negative 1 I'm going to be able to put on the graph then. I hope you like my new little graph board. I'm really missing my magnetic ones. So if I have the negative 1 right here, here is where that vertex is going to be running through. Now, we also learned last week how to get this on a graph. And so we set up a little table. And if you remember, the vertex is important because that is where we want to have our middle be. And so -1, 0, 1, maybe -2. We would want to find the points. So maybe even -3. So if I stick 0 in for all of these, then I know this one's going to be 6. If I stick 1 in for all of those, I am going to have 2 plus 4 plus 6 equals 12. If I stick -1 in for all of those x's, I am going to get 2. The negative is going to make that negative. So 2 minus 4 is -2, plus 6 is going to be 4. Now I'm going to stick -2 in, so I'm going to get 8, because -2 times -2 is 4, times 2 is 8. The negative here is going to make that 0. I'm left with 6. This is when you begin to see your mirror images. So make sure that you start to see those images. Now I'm going to go ahead and start putting these points on the graph. I just want to remind you guys how to do this. Hopefully you learned it last week. So -1, -2, and then we're going to come up to here for a point. Then 0 and 6. This one's going to be 1 and 12 is going to be somewhere up there. And I'm going to guess that -3 is also probably 12. But it's a very narrow. And so there is my quadratic. Now, you might be asking, what was the bottom point? We actually didn't figure out what the bottom point was. So we did not do that. But one of the things that you might be asking is, what is the whole purpose of this? Or what is my goal in life? Well, the goal in life with quadratics is, I know that you're like hoping for a drum roll or something, but the goal is, where does it cross x-axis? Where does it cross the x-axis? So here's one of our, let's just say that our bottom point was down there. Now some of them may not cross the x-axis, but no, they will cross the x-axis. They could be flipped. Sorry about that. How many answers am I going to have? I'm going to have 2. Here's one. Here's another one. And you can have them sitting above, but for our purposes, you're going to have it crossing the x-axis. So you need to make sure that you are having 2 answers. Now, the rest of what we're going to do in this chapter is going to be working toward that. But today, we are going to find these 2 answers by just getting it on the graph, which you already know how to do. So if you look at example number 1 on page 526, it shows you where that graph crosses the x-axis. It's pretty easy. You just eyeball it, and you would, if I said, what are the 2 answers? What are the 2 points for the equation y equals 1/2 x squared minus 8? You would tell me that it's 4, 0, and -4, 0. Then if we popped over to example number 2 and I said, okay, tell me what the 2 answers are for this one, you can see that they are 2, 0, and -1, 0. Now, they're just showing you the graphs. We now have to remember how to get this on the graph so that we can then find the answers. So we're going to do checkpoint number 1 together, and it says use a graph to estimate the solutions of x squared minus x equals 6. So that's what we're going to begin with our goal in mind. So we have x squared, let me get the right problem, x squared minus x equals 6. Now, we have to write this in standard form, which means that that 6 has to come over to the other side. So we're going to have x squared minus x. We bring it over to the other side. Is going to be minus 6 equals 0 or y. And now I am ready to start working my a couple of steps. So my first step is to find the values of a, b, and c. A is 1, B is -1, and C is -6. Now, I hope that you're following all these steps. The second step is going to be to find the vertex. And so the vertex is going to be x equals -b over 2a. And so I come over here. Well, -b, -1, it's going to turn into a 1. And then 2 times 1 is 2. So my vertex is going to be at 1/2. And that looks like the previous problem is at 1/2 as well. And so now what we're going to do, now that we've got that, I can move to step 3. And that is where I am going, I'm going to set up my table of values. You guys have done the table of values before. You should remember how to do this. But this one needs to be the middle because that's where that middle point is going to be. So I'm going to have 1/2, 1, 2, maybe 0, maybe -1. I don't like to work with the fractions. Neither do you. So we'll figure out, we're going to figure out where the bottom point's going to be, and then the rest will be whole numbers. So 1/2 times 1/2 is going to be 1/4. Then minus 1/2 minus 6 equals 0. So 1/4 minus 1/2, if you remember how to do your common denominator, we've got to change everything. So we're going to change this so that it's 1/4 minus 2 over 4 minus 24 over 4. Over 4. Now, if you don't remember what I'm doing with this, then you need to go back and review the fractions. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. But I'm going to be left with 4, 5, or 6, minus 27 over 4, which comes out to nearly 8. 4 times 7 is, 28. So it's almost 7. So it's going to be like 6, 6 1/4? Negative. So 1/2 and then -6 1/4 is going to be somewhere. We're going to put that on in just a minute. Now that we've gotten the fraction piece out of the way, let's pop 1 into this. So this is the one we're looking at. I know I've got a lot on the board. I wish I had a bigger board, but I don't. But this is the one that we're looking at. We're going to stick, let's stick 0 in. So I am going to have 0 minus 0 minus 6. So -6. Then I'm going to stick 1 in. 1 minus 1 minus 6. There is my mirror image. Now I'm going to stick -1 in. Then I'm going to have 1 plus 1 is 2. And now I'm going to have -4. And then 2 times 2 is 4. Minus 2 is 2. Minus 6 is -4. All right, now I have got my, and I don't know if you're seeing that very well. Maybe you can see that a little bit better, like that. Here's my table of values. Here is my vertex, which I then found the other point to down here. Now, if you're a little bit confused as to what I'm doing, you probably need to go back to the previous lesson and listen to that again and review it. But right now I'm going to erase everything, and if you need to rewind and go back and see this, at least it's on the video. But I'm going to erase this.